Jaya Shriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Sri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharma Rashtra Jayate. Suyavangsha Jayate. Om Hri Om. Namaste everyone, and welcome to our latest live stream satsangha. This is brought to you by the International Sanatana Dharma Society. And the International Sanatana Dharma Society, otherwise known as the ISDS, is not just an organization, it is a movement. And it is a movement that is very rapidly spreading throughout the entire world. It is present now in dozens and dozens of nations. We have people who speak a multitude of languages, an amazing number of languages. And these people are all very dedicated, very much involved in our teachings and our movement. And our movement exists for one purpose. And in fact, let me state this very exactly. Our movement exists in order to establish a dharmic, a Vedic civilization upon the earth in modern times. That is the purpose of our movement. I could easily have said other things. I could easily have said that the ISDS exists in order to teach Dharma, which is true. I could have said that the ISDS exists in order to restore Dharma, which is true. And I could have said many, many other things which would have been true that the ISDS does. However, truthfully, if I were to go to the very heart of why this movement exists and what is its ultimate goal, it is in actuality nothing less than reestablishing a civilization upon the earth, with everything that means, with every aspect of what you think of when you think of a civilization. And that is Vedic civilization. At one time, Vedic civilization spanned the entire globe. The entire globe, in one way or another, with cultural diversity, linguistic diversity, etc. But at the same time, indeed, Sanatana Dharma, what we call Sanatana Dharma, the eternal natural way, was at one time the culture, the religion, one could say, of the entire world. It shrunk in the Kali Yuga to the point where approximately around the time of the Buddha, so roughly 6th, 5th century BC, it had shrunk to the point where it incorporated only 2/3 of Asia. So even then, it was still enormous. And by extension, somewhat watered down. Really, you could say that Sanatana Dharma, again in watered down versions, was still found all throughout the rest of the world, not just those 2/3 of Asia, but it was found indeed throughout all of Europe, the Americas, etc. Today it is a religion, it is a path, it is a civilization that indeed has gone through a lot of battering, a lot of persecution, a lot of many, many unfortunate experiences, to the point where it has been, until recently, at its lowest point as far as influence in the world. Well, what we have seen is that this is now changing. And indeed, Sanatana Dharma is growing not only so rapidly, not only as far as numbers, but the understanding of Sanatana Dharma, due to the work of such individuals as Prabhupada, due to the work of not me, but my wonderful students in the ISDS, pure Sanatana Dharma, authentic Sanatana Dharma, qualitatively speaking, is now catching on all throughout the world, to the point where indeed we are going to see Dharma restored in our lifetime, and we are going to see the rebirth of indeed Dharma civilization, with everything that that means. When you hear that word civilization, we're going to see this established again in this world. We can only do this with your help, and that means help in every and any way that you can give. That means, yes, donate. That means become member. That means that if you can simply spread our links everywhere that you can, help us in every way to get the word out about Sanatana Dharma. And in this way, indeed, we will have success, and Sanatana Dharma will indeed be celebrated again in this world. So that was all as an aside. All that being said, let me say now what we're going to be speaking about very specifically is we're going to be talking about the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Chaitanya is someone who was many things, actually. The truth is, I could take 3 hours just talking about the biography alone of Chaitanya, but I won't. Because that's information that you can look up yourself very easily. Let me just say that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was one of the greatest, certainly, Vaishnava saints, gurus, acharyas, etc. in history. He lived from roughly 1486 to 1534. He was born in Bengal, what was called Bengal back then, what now we would call West Bengal. And the last 24 years of his life, he's actually spent in Orissa, in what's called Jagannath Puri. And again, I don't want to go into every single aspect of his life because it would be too much, and it's not the point really, not merely his biography. The point of today is to look at his actual teachings. But let me just say that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was many things, and some things of which people may not be aware. He was a logician, for example. He was a teacher of logic, and again, that may surprise some people actually, because when we think of Chaitanya, we think of someone who was a pure bhakta. And sadly, in the minds of some people, sometimes people think that there is a distinction between being logical and being devotional, that there's somehow a clash between the two. Well, what we've seen is from our gurus and acharyas from the past, oh no, that's the opposite of the truth. What we see is that whether Chaitanya or Madhava or Ramanuja or any of these people, we see that true sages actually incorporate perfectly reason, logic, and philosophy, rigidly stated and understood, along with devotion, pure devotion. And there is no contradiction between the two. So again, it sometimes surprises people that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu not only was a logician, he was a follower of Nyaya, and specifically Nava Nyaya, what's called new logic, new Nyaya, but that's going a little bit too deeply, to the point where he even had his own school in Navadvipa, in Bengal, where he actually taught logic. He was a guru of logic. But then soon thereafter, he indeed became a Vaishnava, full-fledged Vaishnava. He was a Vaishnava to begin with, but he became an absolutely pure Vaishnava, absolutely in love with Bhagavan Sri Krishna. And from that point on, from roughly the age of 24 and then into the rest of his life, he ended up just doing nothing but praising Krishna, speaking about Krishna, helping others to understand Krishna, etc. And he traveled the length and breadth of India before finally stopping and again staying in Orissa and Jagannath Puri for the remainder of his life. And this is what he did, he was truly a great Acharya, a great Vaishnava. In fact, I have called him, no one else has called him this, but I've called him the 13th Alvar. You know, there are 12 Alvars in the Vaishnava tradition, and these are known to be among the greatest sages of the Vaishnava tradition. Well, Chaitanya, in his own way, due to many reasons that, again, I don't have time to go into, I consider to be the 13th Alvar, because much of his behavior, of his teachings, of his mood, more than anything, matched that of the other 12 Alvars. So, truly a remarkable individual. However, interestingly, even though he was indeed a great bhakta, great devotee of Krishna, but also a great teacher, a great philosopher, interestingly, he did not write a lot. Unlike other philosophers, he didn't write commentaries on Brahma Sutras or Bhagavad Gita or anything like this. He didn't write any original works. Rather, he wrote the Shikshashtakam, 8 verses. And that's all he wrote. That's all we have from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, are these 8 beautiful verses. Shikshashtakam means Shiksha. Shiksha means teaching or instruction. Ashtakam means 8. Ashta, like Ashtanga, like the 8-limbed yoga. So Ashta means 8. So these are the 8 instructions from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And again, the only thing that he wrote. And he wrote it in pure Sanskrit. So was he capable of writing tremendous commentaries, etc.? Of course he was. Of course he was. Again, he was a philosopher. He was a logician, etc. But instead, interestingly, rather than quantity, he obviously chose quality. And he wrote only 8 verses. But when you read these verses, they are perfect. When you read these verses convey the essence of the Vedic scriptures perfectly, the essence of bhakti perfectly. So what we're going to be doing, and this will be a multi-part series because we're going to look at all 8 of these verses. What we're going to be doing is indeed looking at these verses. I'll be commenting on these verses. And indeed, again, because there are 8 of them and they are very, very deep verses philosophically and in so many ways, we're not going to be able to look at all of them today. Rather, we will continue next week and maybe the week after that. We'll see. We'll see how many weeks we will be doing this. But if you want to look at the verses as I'm commenting on them, if you just look in the description of this video, you'll find 3 verses that we're going to look at today of the 8. Again, we're not going to do them all, just 3 for today. And with that, I will read these beautiful verses from the Shikshashtakam, and then I'll be commenting on them. So we will begin very logically, sequentially, with the first one. And it proceeds in this way. Glory to Sri Krishna Sankirtanam, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years and extinguishes the fire of conditional life, of repeated birth and death. This Sankirtana is the prime benediction for humanity at large, because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss, and it enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we are always anxious. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And just due to having to save some space, I didn't include the Sanskrit in this. You can look up the Sanskrit very easily, actually, online. The Sanskrit itself, for those who know how to read Sanskrit, the Sanskrit is poetic and beautiful beyond words. The English is beautiful, but when you read it in the original especially, and you see the flow, it is just, all these 8 verses are truly beautiful. So let's go through this a little bit. First of all, glory to Sri Krishna Sankirtana. First, what is meant by this? Sankirtana, or sometimes in the Hindiized version, what people call Sankirtan, which is incorrect. Sankirtana is how you actually say this. The A is pronounced on the end. Sankirtana is a very special word. What it means is, it indeed does mean kirtana itself, that is singing about the glories of Krishna, praising Krishna, celebrating Krishna in this way by indeed singing bhajans, kirtana, etc. But more than this, what is meant by Sankirtana, and this is a very specific Sanskrit word that sadly a lot of people in the West think that they know what it means because they've been told what it means. But when you study the actual Sanskrit, including the original Sanskrit dictionaries, grammars, etc., has a slightly different meaning from, let's say, the popular the popular understanding of this. Sankirtana does not mean congregational chanting. That's often how it is translated. That actually is not in any way what it means. Again, if you understand the original Sanskrit, if you understand the prefix and then the word itself, kirtana. Rather, what it means is celebration or glorification. So Sankirtana can actually be done by one person. It can be done by a multitude of people and more, while certainly the bulk of the meaning does indeed mean praising via song, that is kirtana or bhajana. That's not the only meaning. It also means just praising. If you are simply, even just verbally, but without lyrics, without song, if you are praising Krishna or Vishnu or Narayana, that is also considered to be Sankirtana. So again, the somewhat more modern meaning in the last 50 years or so, meaning of this word versus its actual meaning in Sanskrit, traditionally understood in accordance with all of the traditional Sanskrit grammars, little bit of a difference. A little bit of a difference, but that's what the word means. So, glory to Sri Krishna, Sankirtana. So, glory to the praising of Krishna, of Sri Krishna, Bhagavan Sri Krishna. Now, what is meant by this? Well, it is understood that Bhagavan Sri Krishna, and this is why you will always hear me say at the very beginning and at the end, I will say, Jaya Bhagavan Sri Krishna. He is the avatar for our age. He is the avatar for the Kali Yuga, very specifically. So what this beginning, what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is saying is, he is glorifying the praising of Krishna. And again, especially in song, especially what's called, again, the Hindiized version, kirtan, what is actually kirtana. This is what he is praising with these words, for those people who have not encountered this term before. But now he goes on to explain why it is that Sankirtana is indeed so glorious. So let's go on to the next clauses. Sankirtana, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years. We'll stop there. So this is very beautifully expressed. This is the idea, is that for those of us who have been on this sojourn within the material world for however many lifetimes, whether it's 1, whether it's 100, whether it's 1,000. What happens to us naturally, well, unnaturally really, is that over time, because people are in illusion, in a way, one could say that there is a type of dust, dirt, that accumulates in the heart. Now, not literally, of course, that's not what is meant. Rather, spiritually speaking, one could say, psychically speaking. When we live lives that are contrary to Dharma, what happens is that we indeed become contaminated internally. So as a result, and again, this is spoken of symbolically, it is almost as if there is a layer of dust upon the heart. It is as a result of this dust upon the heart that so many living beings, human beings, find it so difficult to truly love. To truly love, to love openly, honestly, without fear, in complete sincerity, etc. It is because of this accumulation of dust over many, many lifetimes that indeed we don't know ourselves, we don't know God. So what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says here is that by engaging in the glorification, the celebration, the praise of Krishna, what happens is our very hearts are cleansed of this dirt that is there, that has been accumulated for years. He says years here. We understand, of course, that it means lifetimes. Indeed, afterwards he makes this clear. And extinguishes the fire of conditional life. This is a very powerful statement here. And this is not the end of this sentence, but I want to stop with this clause. By praising Krishna, by praising God, indeed, the fire of conditional life is extinguished. Now let's explain what is meant by this. First of all, what's meant by conditional life? Again, what is meant by this is life within the material world. Living life in illusion. Living life in illusion. When we live life in illusion, what happens? It's as if we're in a fire in a way. because we go through suffering. Oh yes, some so-called happiness too, but what kind of happiness? Oh, getting drunk once in a while, eating good food, just things like this that are very temporary. Really, truthfully, the material world, for those who are specifically in ignorance, is a place of suffering. It is as if we're constantly in fire. And for those of us who have indeed suffered in this world, physically, mentally, emotionally, in any way whatsoever, yes, we understand this terminology. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is being very insightful here. That when you are suffering, it's like you're in a fire. It's like you're surrounded by fire. It's like your skin, it's like your innards are on fire when you're suffering. Well, how beautiful. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu here is saying that when we praise Krishna, when we sing the glories of Krishna, that fire is extinguished by the very names of Krishna themselves, of repeated birth and death. And then this is the last clause for this sentence. So again, speaking about this dust that is upon the heart, this fire that we have been experiencing, not just in this lifetime, not just for years, but for lifetimes. Very good. Let's go on now a little bit more. This Sankirtana is the prime benediction for humanity at large. Very good. Let's stop there for a moment. So this praising of Krishna, this praising of Narayana, of Vishnu, this is the greatest of benedictions. Why is this the greatest of benedictions? Well, first of all, again, we know that we're suffering. We want our suffering to end. And by praising Krishna, that is by embracing truly the spiritual, by embracing bhakti or the sweetness of devotion to Krishna, we are going to the very heart of our problem of what is causing our suffering to begin with. You see, everyone knows that there's a lot of suffering in the world, and people will try to attack that suffering in different ways. For some people, they'll try to feed people literal food. They'll try to take care of their bodies, etc. Other people will try to help them psychologically, and in so many ways, too many to list, too numerous to list. But the truth of the matter is, in whatever way we try to help either ourselves or others, unless we go to the very root problem of why it is that we are in that fire of suffering, the suffering really will just continue. There will be temporary relief, but the suffering will continue. We know we need to go to the very root of why it is that we are suffering, and that ultimately is the spiritual. It ultimately is because, again, of our illusion, because we think that we are separated from God, and we're not. That's the illusion. Indeed, we think we're God. We think we are God. Oh, what to speak of feeling that we're separated from God. Some of us, not everyone, but some people have become so monstrous as to actually think that they are God. Well, this is why they suffer. This is why people suffer. So indeed, if we want our suffering to stop, we have to go to the very root. So this is what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is saying here. This Sankirtana is the prime benediction for humanity at large, for all beings, because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. How poetic and how absolutely beautiful. And most devotees understand what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu means by this, but I'll still explain it for those who have never encountered this term. The moon itself, Chandra. Chandra is considered to be not just the moon, not just that big rock-like ball that we see in the sky at night, sometimes during the day as well. But rather we understand that the influence of Chandra, the influence of the moon, is something that is healing in so many ways. So thus some Ayurvedic physicians will grow their herbs very specifically in such a way that it has the influence of the moon. They will cultivate those herbs at night when there's a full moon, for example, because it's understood that the moon is healing. Well, what's being said here by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is that in the same way that the moon spreads its healing rays upon all beings, that this Sankirtana is the same way, that it spreads the rays of healing upon all beings. So now let's go on. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. How perfectly stated. Transcendental knowledge. Transcendental knowledge alone in itself is something that is invaluable. If we are to achieve transcendental knowledge, what does that mean? That means that we awaken our buddhi, our wisdom faculty. In some cases, technically speaking, the Agya Chakra, the third eye, we have insight, we have wisdom. It means we understand the scriptures now. It means that we understand who we are, etc. We understand the answers to all philosophical inquiries, etc., etc. That's what transcendental knowledge is. So this is something that is wonderful to attain. But listen to this verse very carefully. What this sentence is saying is that as great as that is, there's something even greater. So what this is saying is it is the life of all transcendental knowledge. In other words, transcendental knowledge, philosophical knowledge, insight, wisdom insight itself is an amazing attainment. But this Sankirtana, this praising of God, this praising of Krishna with devotion is the very life essence of even transcendental knowledge, because it gives that transcendental knowledge sweetness. Now that transcendental knowledge is tinged by love and the sweetness thereof. That being the case, now that transcendental knowledge comes to life. Now let's go on. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss. Well, that's a given. If we are to say one thing about bhakti, if we are to say one thing about the bhakti experience, it is that it is bliss. It is blissful. To praise Krishna, to praise Narayana in Kirtana, in Bhajana, through music, through katha, through speaking about God and God's pastimes, etc., etc., and more, to experience God in meditation is the most blissful experience imaginable. There is nothing more blissful. So thus, it increases the ocean of transcendental bliss within us. And then it enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we are always anxious. Again, I'm going to keep repeating myself. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. All these verses are beautiful. This verse is beautiful. Each sentence is beautiful. This ending is beautiful. And it enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we are always anxious. Every living being is seeking nectar. My guru would say this also actually in various ways. But this is something that is understood. Every living being is seeking true pleasure. Not impermanent pleasure, not just the sort of pleasure that comes and goes, but each living being is seeking true pleasure that is spiritual in nature, which when you have it, you're satisfied. When you have it, you understand that you are now quite literally touching the eternal. This is the pleasure that we're seeking. Well, that pleasure has been expressed as amritam in many, many ways, as actual nectar. It's like drinking nectar. Can you imagine? I've had this experience. Can you imagine it being an excruciatingly hot day, 100 degrees, and you're forced to be outside, and you're in the sun, and you're burning up, and there's no water around you really, no water fountain, and you're just desperate. Oh my Lord, I need something. And then here comes someone to your rescue. And they don't just give you a nice glass of cold water. Rather, they give you nectar. They give you cold nectar of some sort of fruit, mango nectar, papaya nectar, something like this. And you drink that, and your feeling is, oh my Lord, my life is fulfilled. Well, that's just a material example. In actuality, what we're talking about is that nectar which, again, all beings are seeking, and the deprivation of which causes our anxiety, causes our suffering. Well, when we are praising God in a real way with devotion, we experience that nectar that we are all seeking. Very good. That's the end of the first verse. We're going to go on now to verse 2 of the Shikshashtakam. Speaking of nectar, the nectar of water. And verse 2 proceeds in this way. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings, and thus you have hundreds and millions of names. In these transcendental names, you have invested all your transcendental energies. There are not even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness you enable us to easily approach you by your holy names. But I am so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. Oh, that last part. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that because it's actually more powerful than people understand. But let's go through this sequentially. Oh my Lord. So it begins in this way, that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he wrote this Shikshashtakam, yes, these are instructions, but this is something I should have mentioned, something I've meditated upon for a very long time, because the first time I read the Shikshashtakam was, I don't know, over 40 years ago, something like that, and I was always struck by them. In some of these, he is addressing God himself. So these are very personal for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and this is one of these verses where he's speaking directly to Krishna. So he says, "O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings." We will stop there for now, and we will explore what is meant in this clause. So indeed, Harinama, Harinama, this is the way in which we know God in the Kali Yuga. There is verse after verse after verse throughout the Vedic scriptures that explain that in the Kali Yuga itself, the best way of approaching God, the best way of doing sadhana, the best way of knowing God is indeed to meditate upon the names of God. So thus, this is why mantra meditation is the process for this day and age. So thus, this is why in the ISDS, but also the majority of Vaishnavas in the world, we recite Om Namo Narayanaya, the name of God. But there are hundreds of such mantras that have names of God within them. This is the way in which we indeed achieve liberation in this day and age, is by meditating upon the names of God. So this is what he is saying here. Your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings. This is indeed especially the case now, today, in the Kali Yuga. This is the path, is to meditate upon the holy names of the Lord. Now let's go on. And thus you have hundreds and millions of names. Indeed, I've spoken about this in the past. In fact, some people have asked in the past, oh, how many names of Narayana are there? And certainly hundreds, certainly thousands that are there in the Vedic scriptures. I've mentioned that there's an entire scripture, Sri Vishnu Sahasranama, that has 1,000 names of Vishnu alone. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu very correctly here is saying that actually there are hundreds and even millions of such names. Such is the infinite nature of Sriman Narayana. And now let's go on. In these transcendental names, you have invested your transcendental energies. This is saying, in a way, what we know metaphysically to be the case with the nature of the names of God. And that is that the reason why meditating upon the names of God is so effective for us is because the names of God are non-different from God himself. You see, all of us have arbitrary names. We all have names. What is your name? What name did your parents give you? You know, we all have names that our parents gave us, and that's arbitrary. Our name could have been something else. So our name and who we are distinct. They're not the same. Well, we are temporary beings. We go through lifetime after lifetime through reincarnation, so in every lifetime we have a different name. God, on the other hand, is that being who does not change. God is that being who truly is eternal and whose names are eternal. God being this eternal being, when was God given his name? You can't pick a specific time. Rather, God's names are co-eternal with God, and more, they are co-absolute with God. So thus, what God is indeed shared in the very names of God. So when we recite the names of God in meditation, we are communing quite literally, fully, and absolutely with God. So this is what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is actually saying here. that all of your energies, your transcendental energies, have been invested in your transcendental names. And now we continue. There are not even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. This points to the mercy, to the grace of Sriman Narayana. That indeed, as efficacious, as salvific as are the names of Krishna, there are no hard and fast rules. In other words, if you're ill and lying in bed, chant the names of Krishna. If you're walking through a park, chant the names of Krishna. If you're driving your car, chant the names of Krishna. If you're cooking, chant the names of Krishna. If you say the names of Krishna out loud, do so. If you say the names of Krishna within your mind, do so, etc., etc., etc. This is the mercy of God, is that as powerful as meditating upon the names of God, as powerful as that is, there are no hard and fast rules. The important thing is that we do so. So this points to specifically the mercy of Krishna. And then we continue, O my Lord, out of kindness, you enable us to easily approach you by your holy names. We'll stop there. So again, this is further confirmation of what was just said, that this is the nature of Krishna's mercy, that indeed it is out of his kindness that we have the ability to know Krishna by reciting the names of Krishna. And now, finally, he says this very interesting last clause. And he's talking about himself. He's saying I. He talks about himself. But I am so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. And he says this with absolute humility. Why does Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who knows Krishna as intimately as anyone can, why does he say this about himself? It is an expression of absolute humility on his part. That's what it is. So thus he says that, oh yes, I know this is how we are to know God, by reciting the names of God, by meditating upon the names of God. But so unfortunate am I, so lowly am I, that I have no attraction to these names. So what is he really saying? He really is not speaking about himself. In his humility he is, but in actuality obviously he's not. He's talking about the common individual who, even though salvation is presented to them right here, right now, quite literally, here it is. Here is your salvation. Most people will look at it and just inch away. And they don't have that attraction to recite the names of God, to do meditation, to follow Dharma, to do sadhana, etc., etc., etc. So this is indeed the idea. This is what he's saying. He's speaking to us. He's saying that, oh yes, here is salvation, but do you have the strength? Do you have the humility? Do you have the sincerity? Do you have everything that it really takes in order to practice, in order to take advantage of the fact that God is so merciful that he has given us his names to meditate upon, and that's all we need to do. And if we do this as a regular practice, we will know him. So in a way, in his humility, he's speaking about himself, but not really. He's speaking about us. Do we have that attraction? And if not, why not? And if not, let's develop that attraction. Because once we have this attraction to the names of God, we will have everything. Trinadapi sunechena turorapi sahishnuna amanina manadena kirtanaya sadaharihi. This is the next verse that we're going to be looking at, and this is Shikshashtakam 3. And I memorized the Sanskrit a very, very long time ago, maybe 30 years ago, because of the entire Shikshashtakam, of the 8 verses, this is one of the most important, because now having established Sankirtanam, now having established how it is that we know Krishna, that is, by meditating upon his holy names. How do we do this exactly? Well, now Chaitanya Mahaprabhu reveals the inner mood of the Vaishnava, the inner mood of that individual who wishes truly to know Krishna. And this is how this verse proceeds. One should chant the holy name of Lord Hari in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than the straw in the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respects to others. In such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. Beautiful, beautiful. Indeed, sadly, I cannot remember at this point if it was Prabhupada or my guru, Sridhar Maharaj, who said this, but one of them actually said, I remember reading this very long time ago, again, over 30 years ago, that this verse is so important that if you can, you should have it written down on a little piece of paper, fold that paper very small, put it in a little clasp type of object that you then wear around your neck so that you will always remember this verse. And I've lost it now, but for a few years I actually did that. I actually bought a little clasp in India when I was there, and I wore that around my neck with this verse in it. That's how important this verse is. So let's go through this. One should chant the holy name of Lord Hari in a humble state of mind. This is what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is telling us, that this is how we are to meditate upon the names of God. Let me back up. For those individuals who know this, you know that I teach mantra meditation, that I teach meditation upon the names of God, exactly as Mahaprabhu, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is speaking of here. And very specifically, Om Namo Narayanaya, but truthfully, any of the authorized mantras that are revealed in the Vedic scriptures are good. And that being the case, this verse is explaining precisely what the mood is when one is doing that practice of mantra meditation. So it is important that we understand the basis of it all, first and foremost, is humility. Indeed, this is the basis of all spirituality. You see, this, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent, and please forgive me, but this is important. For those of you who go on wild excursions on YouTube or any of its equivalents, BitChute or any of these places, and you view the videos of all of these gurus here, gurus there, spiritual teachers, spiritual coaches, etc., etc., etc. There are certain things, if they are frauds, there are certain things that you will see are always missing from their talks, their discourses, their rants. There are certain things that are always missing. Often it's God. They'll rarely talk about God other than a little lip service once in a while. But one thing that you will see that is always missing when fraudulent spiritual teachers are speaking is the importance of humility. Almost none of them will speak about this. It's because they can't. It's because they are the opposite of humble. Well, this is foundational to what it means to be a true spiritual practitioner, is that indeed you have to have a sense of humility. Not humiliation, not a false humility, meaning that, you just think badly of yourself, you have no self-confidence, etc. No, that's not what's meant by humility. Humility simply means that you know your place before God. That's all that's meant by humility. You know your place before God, and you don't put on airs, and you don't pretend that you're something greater than you are. You see, sadly, and people know this, people have experienced this, that sadly it often tends to be supposedly spiritual people who are more pretentious than anyone on earth. When you meet New Age types, they tend to be very egotistical, very pretentious, the opposite of having humility. And that's why they make zero spiritual progress. New Age people make zero spiritual progress over the course of their life. They leave this life having the exact same amount of spiritual progress that they started this life with. And this is the number one reason why. They don't have that humility before God, before the vastness, the greatness of this universe, before anyone and anything that is greater than them. And there are an infinite number of things and people greater than them. And yet they have no humility. Indeed, this is why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu starts this very important verse with this, that we must have a humble state of mind. We must understand that should I have a healthy self-confidence? Yes, absolutely. Should I have a healthy pride in myself, my accomplishments? Absolutely. You cannot accomplish anything without that. But I should also understand that before God, I am nothing. Before God, I am nothing. When we begin with that understanding, that is the beginning of spiritual progress. And only then can our practice now bear fruit, because we have rid ourselves of that artificial wall made of brick of false ego. So let's continue. Thinking oneself lower than the straw in the street. Oh, that's powerful. This is continuing talking about humility. And indeed, before God, you see, keep in mind, again, we're talking about before God. This is how we think of ourselves. That yes, I am lower than a piece of straw in the street before God. Before God, I don't even exist. You see, this is a healthy humility, because what are we understanding? That I am finite and I am here before the infinite. I am here before my source, before my origin, before that being who understands me and every living being better than all of us combined understand ourselves. That being the case, oh yes, I am a straw in the street before God. And indeed, this is why, for those individuals who know, and I can't demonstrate it because I'm sitting in Ardha Padmasana right now, and if I did, you wouldn't see me. But this is why we offer Dandavata pranams, what is called Dandavata. That is, before God, we quite literally lie down on the floor like a stick before God. So imitating a straw, imitating a stick on the ground before God. This is how we express our humility and our devotion and our worship of God, understanding who this is, who we are lying before, who we are there in front of. Now, let's go on. We should be more tolerant than a tree. Again, how beautiful. I warned you, you're going to hear me use that all the time. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. We must be more tolerant than a tree. What does this mean? When you think about it, when you think about trees, and I think about trees a lot actually, because as you probably know, I love nature. In fact, right in front of me, I'm looking out the window and there's a beautiful tree. The ISDS temple and ashram, we're blessed to have beautiful trees here. When you look at a tree, it is something that is glorious, that is beautiful. It gives shelter to others, depending on the kind of tree. It will give sustenance, it will give fruits, etc., nuts. There are little beings who live in the tree. That's another reason why I love our trees around our temple here, is because we have one tree in front that I call an apartment complex for birds. We have so many birds in our trees that it's amazing. So trees are a benefactor, and yet they're tolerant. It will rain on the tree. It will be cold. It will be warm. The sunshine will beat down on the tree. It will be winter time, and there will be snow all around the tree. Fools, human beings, will go and kick the tree, abuse the tree sometimes, and yet the tree is tolerant. It gives of itself to others in love. It is a shelter for others, and sometimes, again, it has to go through little sufferings, but it doesn't complain. We are to be like this as well. We are to be a blessing upon all beings who cross our path. And we are to tolerate the small injustices of this world that are foisted upon us. Not as victims, not allow ourselves to be victimized. Not what I'm saying. Again, we're not pacifists. But we are to be tolerant of stupidity, of someone who approaches us and they're just ignorant. We understand, they're making a mistake. All right, what can you do? You can't teach them, you move on. So we are to be tolerant. And devoid of all sense of false prestige. Devoid of all sense of false prestige. So again, this, again and again, what you see in this verse is this really stressing on humility. So this idea of false prestige. So again, individuals who are so limited, so imperfect, in everything that they are, and yet they are full of this false prestige, this false bravado, this false sense of entitlement. And sadly, you see this both among materialists, but you also see this among many so-called spiritual individuals. All you have to do is hunt around YouTube a little bit and find some of these so-called spiritual teachers who are brimming with false prestige, false bravado, etc., etc. Again, no humility. Well, we are to become devoid of that false prestige. Again, understanding our place in the universe, understanding that our Atman is great, is wonderful beyond expression, but it is only wonderful beyond expression because its source is Paramatman, is God. So being devoid of false prestige and ready to offer all respect to others. That's self-explanatory. When we meet others, and especially good people, we should be ready to be courteous. We should be ready to have proper etiquette. We should be ready in humility to offer our respects to them, to offer our obeisances. This is why in our tradition, and this is true sampradaya-wide, this is true regardless of whether you are Vaishnava, Shaiva, Shakta, this is true regardless of anything. If you are a follower of Sanatana Dharma, the way that we greet each other, especially in meeting but also in departing, is we say Namaste. And no, again, for those who are riddled with stereotypes, Namaste is not some hippie saying. It's not just something for LA yogis to say to each other in faux piety. No, it is indeed what followers of Sanatana Dharma say to each other. And Namaste is a compound. The words are actually Namaha Te. And it becomes S, Namas, Namaste. Meaning, very simply, I offer my obeisances unto you. I offer my respects unto you. This is what Namaste means. It's found throughout the Vedic scriptures. It's not just an Indian greeting. It's Vedic. It's Vedic. So this is why, if you are indeed a follower of Sanatana Dharma, this is what we say to each other. When I greet my students for the first time, when I write to my students via email or anything, I begin with Namaste, so-and-so, such and such, whatever the person's name is. So, indeed, offer all respects to others. And now, finally, in such a state of mind, we're going to stop there. Again, this entire verse is expressing the mood, the state of mind that one must be in if you want to meditate upon mantra, i.e. the names of God, with devotion. So, in such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. So, in other words, it is when one fully incorporates in their being the full purport, the full teaching of this verse, verse 3 of the Shikshashtakam. When that is the case, now we are properly prepared to meditate upon the names of the Lord successfully and perpetually. This is what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is saying, and these are the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So that said, we're going to stop here. And again, these are not all the 8 verses. This is all we had time for, as you can see. We will continue next week and maybe the week after and go through the rest of these, again, beautiful verses. Beautiful. That's the only way to describe these verses. Beautiful and profound. So that being said, we only have 5 minutes, but that's all right. I would like to answer some questions, actually. So that being said, if you have any questions, let me tell you, now is the time to please ask them. And if we have to, maybe we'll go slightly over time, because I took a long time commenting on these verses. And again, I know that people have many, many good questions. And it can be questions about these verses or about anything regarding Sanatana Dharma. Very good. So with that, I see many good comments here. Very good. Someone likes my beard and hair. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I've had the beard for at least a year now, something like that. And So far, the vast majority of my students do indeed like it. So thank you so much. Very good. Here is a very, very nice, very direct question about what we've been speaking about from Dharmachari. And it is, Namaste Acharyaji, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is sometimes referred to with the honorary Lord. For ontological reasons, is Sri the most correct address for Sri Vaishnavas, or are both terms acceptable? Very good. Very nice. No, that is a very good question. It's a question of etiquette. And as you say, etiquette itself in this case, because we're talking about spiritual etiquette, it has to have an ontological foundation to it. So indeed, you asked this question in a very good way as far as the language. No, we should not use the word Lord. First of all, the word Lord is English. That's the first thing. It's an English word. Rather, Sri is the honorific that is used traditionally for Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but then also, all great beings, all great acharyas, indeed, even God himself. We say Sri Krishna, Sri Rama, Jaya Sri Rama. So indeed, that is the honorific that is used. So this is the case for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as well. Indeed, not just for Sri Vaishnavas, but for all Vaishnavas. Indeed, even Gaudiya Vaishnavas as well should refer to Chaitanya as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, not Lord Chaitanya. That is the better way. Nothing wrong or sinful. You're not going to get bad karma or anything like this if you say Lord. That's perfectly all right. But again, we're just talking about correct. We're talking about what is correct. We're talking about perfection. So that being the case, yes, better to use the term Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And for those who don't know, actually, let me just state very, very quickly what his name actually means, because it's a very, very beautiful and profound name. Chaitanya, without going very deeply, Chaitanya is another term for consciousness. It is a form of Chaitana, which is another word in Sanskrit for consciousness. Mahaprabhu, on the other hand, means very simply Prabhu. Prabhu is master, one who is a master, and Maha means great. So this is another title of Sri Chaitanya, Mahaprabhu, the great master. So the great master, Sri Chaitanya, is how you would translate this. So very good. With that, let me see if there are any other questions that are here. Very good. Very nice. Here's a question from Nick, and it is, Namaste Acharyaji, will you please explain the difference between Sankirtana and Bhajana? Technically speaking, there's not much of a difference at all, actually. They both really mean the same thing. The two words are used interchangeably. Sankirtana is a little bit more technical. Bhajana is the more general word, meaning worship. It comes from bhaj, from the verb root, meaning to worship. The word is found in the Bhagavad Gita. The word is found all throughout the Puranas, etc. So bhajana means worship very specifically, but of course worship indeed in song form. Whereas Sankirtana is the process very specifically for this age, and it is indeed also singing, but glorification of God. There really isn't much of a difference between the two. So this is why we've seen how the words are often used interchangeably. I've heard some people give the explanation, which is an implausible explanation to me, that Sankirtana means singing the praises of God when you're standing up. Bhajana means sitting down. There's no evidence for that whatsoever. There's no evidence for that. So again, as far as I'm concerned, they're pretty much interchangeable. So I hope that answers the question. And please give me a moment. I want to see what other questions there are. Very good. Here is a very, very good question, actually, from D.N. Knight. And it is this. Is it better for a person to avoid situations which draw out their negative traits, such as anger, lust, etc., or should a person enter those situations and try to overcome negative traits? Let me give you the conclusive answer. And this is undebatable. This is the conclusive answer that is given in the Vedic scriptures and by all the rishis, all the acharyas, all the true gurus of the past. You are to avoid such negative traits. You are to avoid such situations that are tempting. And the reason why is because out of humility, we need to understand that we are not in a position to play with fire. And not just fire, a raging fire that is out of control, beyond our imagination. So that being the case, no, we're told again and again in the Vedic scriptures that we are to, for example, seek good association, avoid bad association. And again, this is scriptural. I can, you can look it up yourself. Look throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam, other Vedic scriptures where this is all said. We are to avoid places where sinful activities take place. There's no such thing as, I'm going to meditate, but I want to challenge myself, so I'm going to go into a strip bar with music blaring at me, rap music, and naked people, etc., and I'm going to meditate there. No, a person, if they're doing that, they're just making an artificial show for others. No, the Vedic scriptures make it very clear. We are to avoid such places. We are to avoid such people. Because this is the thing. Even avoiding such negative places, to overcome our negative traits, for some people, will take a lifetime. We don't need to challenge ourselves artificially. To overcome such negative traits is not as easy as many people think. It may take a lifetime. We don't want to then compound that by putting ourselves in a situation that are going to now cultivate more negative traits. So no, we are to do the opposite. Again, the Vedic scriptures say again and again, seek good association, seek good places, seek good everything coming into our senses, good sounds, good music, good visuals, good scents, good tastes, etc., etc., etc. That which is sattvic. So indeed, we are to seek a sattvic lifestyle, a lifestyle of goodness, not its opposite. So this is why I would say to you, yes, don't seek the negative, even to challenge yourself. Sadly, if a person does that, most likely they'll fail the challenge. And it would have been unnecessary. Seek the opposite. Seek that which you desire. You desire the good? You really desire the good? You're not playing games? Claiming that you're desiring the good, but subconsciously you actually want the evil? You really want the good? Go to the good. Go to the good. It's that simple to understand, and yet it is challenging in and of itself to do. Trust me. That's why most people don't do it. So seek the good and the good alone, and you will have spiritual success. So I hope that answers the question. Wonderful. So again, very nice comments, wonderful comments, which I'm not going to read just due to time. Very tempting to do so, but I want to see if there are questions. And I might just take one or two more at the most. Very good. The vast majority of the comments here are just that. They're wonderful, very supportive comments. And I truly appreciate that very much. All right. Very good. Very good. Well, I'm going to stop there. I'm tempted to read some of these comments because, again, they're just so positive and so wonderful. Let me just say, for example, Prometheus here toward the end, he says, Namaste Acharyaji, great lesson today, of course. Thank you so much. Sri Krishna and your teachings have changed my life so much for the better. Truly an honor to hear you speak. Jaya Sriman Narayana. And again, so many comments like that. Well, I thank you very much for your support. Ananta Shesha says, thank you so much for this amazing talk about the Shikshashtakam, Acharyaji. Truly wonderful amrita, truly wonderful nectar, and on and on. Well, thank you. Thank you for these wonderful comments. So at this point, maybe I'll stop here because we are a little bit over. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for your sincerity. Thank you for your support. Thank you for taking this path seriously. Thank you for taking these live streams seriously. Thank you for taking what I teach seriously. And as I say repeatedly, I ask you with great humility, indeed I beg you, to incorporate these teachings into your life. Practice this. It's one thing, and it's certainly beneficial to come here and listen to these talks, learn about the Vedic scriptures, learn about Sanatana Dharma, etc. But more than that, I ask you to practice also. Actually practice all of these things that we speak about week after week after week. Start to meditate. Start to meditate with great humility and with great sincerity and with great devotion. Meditate upon the names of God. If you don't have an altar yet, set up a beautiful little altar in your home. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate. And start to do puja. Just offer even a little stick of incense to an image of Krishna, an image to Sriman Narayana. Begin to study, read these scriptures on your own if you can. Read the Bhagavad Gita. Read the at least major Upanishads, Narada Bhakti Sutras, Yoga Sutras, Srimad Bhagavatam, etc. Practice this path in your daily life. And as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself is here trying to explain to you, as I try to assure you every single week, if you practice this path with humility and with sincerity and with a yearning to know God that is greater than anything in existence, I guarantee that you will experience God in your life, and your life will not be the same thereafter. So please practice this. Please surrender to God with everything that you are, and I guarantee you, you will know happiness and your suffering will cease. So with that, again, I thank you for being here. Jaya Shriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Jaya Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharma Rashtra Jayate. Surya Vangsha Jayate. Om Hari Om. And with that, everyone, as always, until the next time that we get together, I ask you all, please, in every way, take very good care of yourselves.